Hello and welcome to this episode of The Rest is Entertainment with me, Marina Hyde.
And me, Richard Osman. Hello, Marina. How are you?
I'm very well. How are you, Richard?
I'm not bad. How has your week been?
It's been good. I'm preparing to go on holiday, so I'm super excited about that. But other than that, it's the classic week before holiday where you have to do a million things.
Does that mean you won't be doing the podcast for the next few weeks, surely?
Richard, this is an always on podcast, which means that I'm actually going to be doing one of the episodes from Corfu.
That is quite something.
Yes, it is quite something.
What people can't see when you talk about still doing podcasting on holiday is that Gary Lineker is behind you with a comedy truncheon.
Yeah. Will rap me on the head if I step out of line, but it won't hurt.
Do you know what? It's only because he cares.
Yeah. And it's only because I'm a professional, Richard, that you can't see through it.
Yeah. Shall we talk about Strictly?
Let's talk about Strictly.
For goodness sake.
This whole story started rolling. Amanda Abbington, who's the Sherlock actress and been in many other things, she left the show rather abruptly in the middle of the last series. There was reports that she'd fallen out over the training methods. She said it was allowed to be known that she was suffering from mild PTSD, and her dance partner, the professional with whom she was paired, Giovanni Panici, is not going to appear in the next season of the show. At first, I suppose people didn't necessarily... The story didn't gain huge amounts of traction, but then two earlier of Giovanni's partners, Laura Whitmore and Ranveer Singh, also spoke to the BBC, we're given to understand, as part of their investigation to this. And now this has really turbocharged it. Zara McDermott, the former Love Island contestant who appeared in the season prior.
Who we love.
She was spoken to in the course of the BBC investigation, and they reviewed footage that was taken within their rehearsal room and approached her. And some of this footage is apparently very, very disturbing. He has been let go, we understand, by the BBC for gross misconduct. So he had already been announced as one of the dancers for the next season and is now not going to appear. He initially released a statement saying his drive to win may have affected my training regime. And Zara McDermott herself has now released a statement in which she said, people are probably wondering why I didn't speak out before. And she said, I was scared about the public backlash. I was scared about my future, and I was scared of victim shaming. Obviously, such is the way we live now that all of these are now happening.
Yep.
Some people, of course, have said, these people should just toughen up. They're in it's a demanding show, and it's called Strictly for a reason. Yeah, it's not called Strictly for that reason. But never mind.
It's called Strictly because of Strictly Ballroom, the Australian film.
But anyway, yeah. And of course, the other thing, the old law, that the longer a story about a show on the BBC runs, the probability of that story becoming about the BBC approaches one. So this is now a sort of
a singularity.
Yeah. And so we see people talking about things like duty of care and the culture of a show and how come it's taken so long for it to come out. We should say, this is the biggest show on TV.
Yes.
It is immensely popular. As we say, it's coming up for its 20th year anniversary. I suppose the persona of the show in general is that it's an extraordinary place. It's a part of the story we tell ourselves about diversity and acceptance.
And it's a real dream factory.
Yeah, it's a dream factory. People go on these amazing journeys. They say it changes their lives. I think what's kind of slightly significant is that, for me, it's changed.
Yeah.
And part of the reason it's changed is part of the reason why it's very successful, because you'll be the first to say that these big formats, these amazing shows that continue to be relevant and super popular after 20 years, say something about their times. They reflect the society, which they also delight. And when Strictly first started, it was a lot more amateur.
Yes, and gentle.
Because these are amateur dancers who are being paired with professionals. And I think there's something about that something has changed. For me, I think it's interesting. First of all, what we should say is that it's really very, very hard, some would say brutal, to become a professional dancer. And all of the professionals, many of them left their families when they were young. They are subject to brutal training regimes. It is normalised to some extent that within the performing arts, and I have a lot of friends who went through different things like this to try and go professional. Also, we see the same thing with athletes.
Yeah. And
what might be sort of one person's complete brutality, semi-abuse, is another, the way we've always done it in...
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the crack that has been fallen down here. And I'll give my reasons why I think Strictly has the ability to get through this. But the crack that's been fallen down is, as you say, Strictly sells dreams. That's the beauty of that show. There's glitter and there's stardust, and it's just a journey and a delight, and just seeing people really express themselves. The world of dancing, as you say, is a brutal one. Now, two other worlds that are absolutely brutal are the world of cooking and the world of military training. Now, when you do a cooking show, you call that cooking show Hell's Kitchen, or you call it Ramsay's Kitchen Nightmares, because you are saying this is brutal, this is tough, this is the world we're in. When you look at military training, it's SAS, are you tough enough? And people are literally screamed at and thrown off cliffs and things like that. But that's the point of that show. It's about, are you strong? Are you tough? It's not about, can you dream your dream and wear a glittery dress? Now, Strictly, for a long time, has managed to have the best of both worlds, which is it has all these professional dancers, all of whom, as you say, have been through fairly brutal regimes to get to where they are and to get to the incredible skill level they are. And it brings in lovely amateur celebrities, and we sit
you're with someone from Emmerdale.
Yeah, and we sit and watch, and they get a bit better and they get a bit better. The last few years, it's so competitive now, and people come in, and the level of dancing is absolutely extraordinary. And to get to that level of dancing, if you're a celebrity and you come in, which is, by the way, what most people I know would do, most people at home, you go in and say, I'm going to absolutely go for this as much as I can. I want to get as much as I can out of the Strictly journey. That's what I'm going to do. If you do that and say that to a dancer, the dancer only has one way to respond to that, which is, oh, well, I know how to get the most out of someone who dances, because that's what happened to me.
This is what was done to me.
This is what was done to me. And so suddenly there's this regime.
Never did me any harm.
Never did me any harm. And by the way, I was talking to a Strictly dancer about this who shall remain nameless, but they were saying exactly that. If you want that level, then you have to do the things that I did. And this person is not a bully in any way whatsoever, but it's just saying it is really, really, really difficult. And when you get those two forces coming together, which is someone really, a celebrity really, really wanting to come and do their best, and a dancer who maybe has been raised in an environment where they were taught in certain difficult ways, you are going to get the issues that they have now got. So
this is a fault line that was waiting to open up.
It's a fault line that was waiting to open up, and good on Amanda Abington for saying, I'm not going to stand for it. And good on, Zara didn't come out with it, but a BBC crew member reported the footage of Graziano. So good on that crew member for doing that as well. But you can see with Zara...
But strange in a way that it should be 9 months after the event.
For sure.
You would have thought that would be surfaced to the very top. And the fact that it hasn't been is going to be...
Shows maybe it's more endemic.
Is the issue.
And also, by the way, Zara's statement about that thing that I didn't want to make a fuss. She is, of course, if you go into a show that everyone tells you is a dream and that everyone says, oh my God, this is like the most magical journey, and for you it isn't, the first thing most people would do is internalize that and think it was their fault and go, oh, I'm letting everybody down. I'm not going to complain. And this is just the normal way of doing things. You see that in relationships in all sorts of areas, and it's no different here. So I think the brutality of what it takes to be a dancer is something that's never been confronted on that show. Occasionally they go, oh my God, it was a really tough week this week and we had to do 2 dances and, I was really put through my paces. But it's never really made clear. And now it has been. I guess it's the BBC's move as to what to do about that.
Well, another part of it, I do think, is the change in the show. I read in an article by Michael Hogan in The Guardian, this extraordinary statistic. I think this is mind-blowing, that in the first series ever of Strictly, 110 was given as a score. And in the last series that we've had, 69 tens were given. Now, you could say, oh, maybe they're just chucking them up, but they're not at all. The standard of dancing has improved beyond. As I say, shows evolve if they were to stay relevant.
You shouldn't go for 20 series, is the truth. It's very, very unusual that a show would still be right at the top of its game after 20. X Factor didn't last that long, but Strictly's been very good at changing its clothes.
I agree, but don't you think it's saying something covertly about our culture? You see that fun amateur things now are, if you look at the world of fun amateur sport, it is just awash with performance enhancing drugs. There's an epidemic of this stuff. People who would once have spent, that type of person would have once spent maybe an hour a day in the gym, now will spend 3 hours. Obviously, lots of this is being driven by social media, but the sense of like high performance that is applied to things which were really just leisure and amateur fun is across the board. It's interesting that this has become so much more of a tough dancing show. You know, there was, back in the day, you know, you remember John Sargent being sort of
Yes.
dragging his partner across the floor. But perhaps he saw that was coming because he resigned from the show, and that was in 2010, because he felt like, oh, it would be taking a joke too far.
Yeah.
He already felt that sort of sense of hype because the judges didn't like it. The other thing I think is that you have because the longer a show goes on, the more the build-up of people who say it changed their lives is, and you get this flywheel effect where people are thinking, oh, it's changed my life, or it's made me feel whole, or all these things. And so to some extent, some of the people who may be drawn to that are people who may feel they wish to have their life changed or may need to be made whole.
Yeah.
So it may draw to some extent vulnerable people with a vulnerability of some type or another, which when you put it in that particular fire pit can easily explode because it's, as we say, it is so brutal. It's interesting, therefore, that unlike sort of best practice across almost all the other reality formats now, they have psychological evaluations that decide whether you're able to do the show.
Yeah.
And they don't have that one Strictly because in some ways it's part of that story, as I said, that we tell ourselves about diversity and changing lives and all this sort of thing. And why would you need to have? But I think you do need to have that.
They tend not to have it on celebrity versions of shows, is the truth. They have it because they were made to have it on regular editions of shows, but on celebrity versions of shows, it's waivers are signed and it's assumed that people can handle themselves.
Well, I think we'll be assuming that they will be having it now after this because this is continuing to unfold.
Yeah,
clearly they are going to have to do a psychological evaluation test. I mean, there are other people who are saying they should shutter it for a year. Such a lot has been made of the 20th anniversary that I don't think they can or should perhaps do that.
Yeah, and listen,
I don't think they should shutter it for a year. Do you?
No, of course, no, I absolutely don't. I think it's, I mean, for practical terms, it's, as you say, it's an enormous show and it's already well underway. And, you know, the contestants have already been booked for the next year. And it's very hard. There's certain shows that you see over the years where I think there's a toxic atmosphere behind them. There are certain big reality shows that you think, I'm not entirely sure I trust the motives of the people making this television show. And Strictly's never been one of those for me. Strictly, genuinely,
Agreed.
From the point of view of the people who are making it, has been about joy and it's been about journeys and it's about transformations and it's about showing Britain to its absolute best. So it's always had somewhere in the brains of the people behind it, there's been glitter coming out. And actually what that can do is blind you sometimes to some of the things that are happening on your show. And so it doesn't blind you from a bad way, it blinds you from that thing of over positivity. And I'm absolutely certain that every now and again there have been rumblings about disagreements in fact, you hear it all the time. You think, oh, so-and-so contestant is quite difficult. And looking back, you go, well, were they difficult or were they just saying that maybe I'm not being treated the way I should be? But it's a brutal world. That whole world is absolutely populated by dancers who, as you say, have been through that in the same way that the gang on SAS Are You Tough Enough have been through boot camps and are so happy to dish it out. And I think it's one of those car crashes that was inevitable and was going to happen. And if the BBC can show that it's taking it incredibly seriously, can understand what's happening, can not sort of say, yes, but, you know, it's tough because if they understand actually culturally the world is changing and people will not put up with the things they used to put up with, that perhaps some of the people they have got as dancers also need a bit of help every now and again because of the way they've been brought up and the world they were brought up in. If they can find a way...
Well, one of them has complained that we're not given sort of adequate enough assistance to face their own behaviour, which seems to me...
Oh, really?
One of the dancers who was no longer with the show is saying that they weren't given enough support. They're sort of suit and countersuit now.
I mean, I can get it. It's two cultures colliding, I would
agree,
say.
and I wonder whether... It is difficult then, though, to recalibrate when it has gone so far down the road of the performance have become much more technically adept and it's become much more professional.
Yeah.
To go back and say... A little bit of amateurism is fine. It's fine to laugh at people. It's fine when people honestly can't do it and we're just having a laugh when they're out there. We used to be like this. It's quite hard to go back to that when you've gone quite far down the road. But it's a little, you know, as I say, we see this across absolutely everything. The sort of hardcore performance gains culture of lots of these things where the fun does get slightly wrung out of it, and this is not just about Strictly, as I say. This is about everything from triathlons to marathons to all sorts of things.
Do you know what? For me, the fun has really gone out of triathlons.
Yeah, marathons likewise.
They used to just be a breeze.
Yeah,
and now everyone takes them so seriously.
Yeah, now. There's something about the sort of professionalisation and high performanceisation, not a word, of things that used to be fun.
Yeah.
And clearly it's driven in lots of ways by social media and by the idea of perfection. But it's interesting that it's bled even onto this, which is a sort of fun Saturday show.
Yeah, we've all worked in organisations where there are targets and you hit those targets and then those targets are raised and you hit those targets and they're raised again. And there is that sort of, performance inflation that's happened with Strictly. And the BBC now have to find a way of stopping that happening, of reassuring people it's not going to happen again.
Of bringing it into the show.
Do you know what? That's exactly what I was going to say. This is what I'm saying about Hell's Kitchen and about SAS Are You Tough Enough? You have to accept that it is very, 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 very hard to train to be a ballroom dancer. You have to accept that those couples are going to have arguments. When was the last time you ever saw an argument on Strictly? You don't do it. And by the way, I understand why, because that's not what they want to have.
People don't want to see this, and actually,
that's not the Strictly way. So they've never ever shown it, and I think you're right. I think you have to slightly go, do you know what? This is not always.
You have to own all of it, and you have to own it on camera. And it's quite interesting. You remember when we did that research that came from More in Common that said that this show skewed sort of most right wing, as it were, compared to lots of the other shows on television. It's quite interesting. If you read a lot of the comments about it, people are saying this is rubbish. It's just dancing. It's not. It's not being in the SS. It's not any of these things. They're not training to be special forces. Now, if any of those people had a daughter and that daughter was hit at work, they would have very, very different views. Whether or not they want to sort of, no one wants to watch that on Saturday night at all. No. I should be very clear about that. But folding it into the show, but making it still kind of heartwarming and part of it, that is the challenge. But we will definitely see that when we next see this show.
I think the big difference is there are things that you choose not to show viewers because you want them to believe a reality. But as a production team, if you start to believe that reality yourself, then you're in trouble. So I think you have to accept what it is that you're making. And you just have to, people can take a bit of reality.
Yeah, it's part of authenticity, which is one of the big sort of buzzwords of the time. So being able to see both sides of it.
And there's absolutely no doubt that Strictly has done some extraordinary things over the last few years and over the last 20 series. And genuinely some extraordinary stories, some extraordinary performances, has made careers, has brought a huge amount of joy, and will continue to do all of those things. But I think can only do it if they have to own the situation that they've created. And the situation they've created is people who've trained in a certain way being asked to train other people in that same way. And you have to deal with it. You have to look at it. You have to cut it off at the root, and you have to show that it is really, really, really hard.
Obviously, I wish none of this had happened to anyone. I think it's
100%,
absolutely terrible, without any question.
It's a terrifying thing for a producer to have to face because they've got their castle and it's completely built and they know exactly what it looks like. But occasionally you just got to go, no, maybe we let a little bit of the truth shine in. And by the way, they let a lot of truth shine in on that show.
Yeah,
almost everything
absolutely.
you see there is true. Almost all the joy you see on that show is true, and some of the journeys you see are true. So they're not lying to people, but there is that they are obviously at the bottom end of what's happening. They're not being entirely honest with viewers, and I think probably they haven't been entirely honest with themselves. We always get lots of headlines when we talk about the BBC as well. Someone sent me two the other day, and I was like, what is this? Someone sent me a headline that said, Richard Osman breaks rule that will cost BBC billions. I was like, oh no, what's this? And it was the thing I said on the podcast about singing along to the words on the wheel.
No.
Yeah, exactly. Which, of course, they just don't show, but that was the headline.
Up. Who wrote that story? Do
you know what?
I'm going to Google it.
Guess which newspaper? Daily Express, who also did Richard Osman talks of fears after last House of Games recording. And you're like, oh,
what were your fears?
And no, that was me saying, oh, we've just finished recording for the year, and you saying, God, I hope no one misbehaves in between now and Christmas. And we're like, yeah. And again, that's the headline on the Daily Express, and that's someone's job.
Well, do write in if you're listening to this in the Daily Express, and I'll suggest the best news lines from this. But those previous ones weren't it.
No. This episode is brought to you by Sky.
Now, Richard, you have a brother.
I do.
The wonderful Matt Osman from Suede.
Why do you ask?
Would you describe yourselves as close?
Yes, different industries, but yeah, we love each other.
You sound closer than the two brothers in the new Sky original, Mr Bigstuff. Stars Danny Dyer as
Yes,
Lee,
please.
an alpha male with a prescription drug addiction, as well as a biscuit tin full of their dad's ashes. Also,
Okay.
yes, please. And Ryan Sampson as Glenn, a nervy perfectionist and carpet salesman striving to live the suburban ideal with his fiancée. Glenn's life is very peaceful and exactly how he likes it until his brother comes crashing into their lives, and it's not long before their perfect lives start to unravel faster than the weave of a cheap carpet. Ryan Sampson also wrote the series. He's an absolutely fantastic comic actor. He was in Plebs and, of course, Brassic, another Sky comedy.
All episodes available to watch now, only on Sky. Shall we talk about the New York Times best books of the 21st century
Yes,
list?
please.
Firstly, it's a really, really great list, I would say. It's one of those things where if you're looking for something to read, there's 100, there will be like 4 that you would be interested in here. And they're very good at saying if you like this, you will also like that.
They got about 500 people to do this, by the way.
Yeah, they asked lots and lots of writers and critics and celebrities.
Artists,
It's very American based, I would say.
I would definitely say that.
That I would definitely say. But that's kind of interesting in a way because there's books there that you don't know, which is quite interesting. If it had been over here, I think we might have known more of them. So I wanted to do a couple of things. I wanted to go through the list and suggest books that people might actually like to read. Because that's
quite a lot on there
thing.
that I don't think people would like to read. There was
I
quite
agree.
a lot of what I would call sort of, books that people think you should read.
There's a lot of that.
And to some extent, their society is not exactly the same as ours. Quite a lot of sort of politically correct things you want to read, and you think, "Oh my God, this is a hard yard. I'm not going to read that." Great, I've now read the paragraph about it on a list, and that counts as me having read that one.
A lot of the non-fiction is very American based, so
There's hardly any non-fiction.
we can skirt over it. There's a few.
But I was stunned by that there was so little non-fiction, and there was really hardly any, I thought, and it was like a few, some great stuff like Tony Judd post-war, Nickel and Dimed, Barbara Ehrenreich. By the way, if you haven't ever read any Barbara Ehrenreich, she died not that long ago, and she's absolutely wonderful.
You see, and this is the interesting thing, because a lot of people, certainly inside the industry, go, "Oh, why do we have lists? Why are we going to have a list of the best books of the 21st century? Of course they're not the best. We shouldn't compare books." And if we didn't have this list, you wouldn't have just told people about Barbara Ehrenreich. And there will be people at home who buy Barbara Ehrenreich's book and love it, and it's added to their life. And that is the reason we have lists. I was at a thing last night with lots of booksellers from all the different Waterstone Smiths, all the indies and what
For
have
your
you.
new book?
For my new book, I was. But listen, we don't need to worry about that just yet. We're talking about other people's books for now.
All right.
Much as I would love to talk about We Solve Murders. And
Get the title in.
I was talking to them about lists and prizes, and they said they're an absolute godsend for us. It's not like there's a big TV show every week about books on British television. They tried it a million times. These things don't particularly rate. There's a brilliant Between the Covers, which is on BBC Two, but that's about as far as it goes. People who like books absolutely love them. Most people don't come into contact with them. It's the truth, culturally. So you have, say, the Booker Prize. So the Booker Prize, when it was won about, would have been 10 years ago now, and they shared it between Margaret Atwood and Bernardine Evaristo. And there was controversy that they'd shared it because they never shared it before. And they go, what's the point? Firstly, we shouldn't even have prizes. And if we are having prizes, why give it to 2 books? And so actually, suddenly it was on the front page of newspapers. And Girl, Woman, Other then sold in absolute bucket loads. And the whole of Britain got to find out who Bernardine Evaristo is. And Bernardine Evaristo's backlist then sells and sells and sells. And she makes an incredible contribution to our culture. And we got this new star in the firmament just because we had a prize. And these book lists
They didn't like ranking things. Nothing wrong with that.
I was reading an obituary last week about a journalist called Pat Hartridge, who was the first person to compile the Sunday Times bestsellers list, because we didn't have it until the 1970s. In the US, they've always had bestsellers lists right back to the sort of 19th century. And in Britain, it was seen as very un-English. And it was seen that actually books should not compete with each other.
Yeah.
And it was Harold Evans at the Times who got Pat Hartridge to compile this list, which he did by ringing 200 bookstores and getting them to literally physically tell her the numbers of books they'd sold that week, and she would then compile it, and compiled it for many, many years. And the argument that we shouldn't compare books, there's something in it, but the moment that there were real book charts, publishers has always known what's sold because they can see their sales numbers. But publishers don't always want to tell people what that is, because publishers actually just want to
Oh my God, they're so secretive.
publish their friends and publish their mates and give their mates more money. And actually, when you actually see what people do buy, then actually the meritocracy comes into order a little bit more, and suddenly books that people actually like and books that people actually read suddenly command bigger fees and bigger advances and things like that. So putting those books in the charts and comparing them actually really, really improves the health.
Speaking of which,
Yeah.
where were the genre books on this list?
There were none.
Where were the romance? Where were the
Yeah,
mysteries?
there's no romance. There's no crime fiction. There is absolutely zero genre fiction on this list, which is
Which tells you
fascinating.
various stories, including about the people who answer the New York Times call to rank them.
Well, I did a cross-reference of the 100 best books on this list, 100 best books of the 21st century, and the 100 best-selling books of the 21st century in the States.
I knew you'd have done that.
Yeah, exactly.
That's why I didn't.
I think there's 4 in there. There's Demon Copperhead, Barbara Kingsolver, which has sold a load. There's Wolf Hall, which sold an absolute ton as well.
Elena Ferrante?
Elena Ferrante, My Beautiful Friend. She's got 3.
Yeah, she had 3 in that
She's got
chart.
3 on that chart. And the Underground Railroad, Colson Whitehead.
Yes.
Those are the ones that crossed across both of those, which tells you, by the way, how great all of those books are.
No Sally Rooney.
No Sally Rooney.
No Mascard.
Yeah, no sort of anyone.
No poetry.
You've read no poetry.
People say that poetry died like 100 years ago, and no.
Did it not?
No, that was the publication of The Wasteland. They think that that's the sort of poetry-sidal event.
Oh, really? Have they not heard of Pam Ayres?
Well, there you go. There you go. She wasn't on it.
So it's a fascinating list, but and there's 100 books on it. And honestly, I would recommend having a look at it. Honestly, most of it need not detain you. It's the truth. There is a type of literature which appeals to people who really, really get literature, and that's literature that uses words in an incredibly interesting and unusual way. And I get it. And people who really know their business can recognise it, understand it, appreciate it, and admire it. That is not what most people want to read. So I'm incredibly happy it's respected and shown, and that people who love that sort of thing can buy it. But on that list, if I was going through that list and things that people hadn't read, Elena Ferrante, of course. George Saunders' Lincoln in the Bardo is in there, which is a brilliant book that people love. And if you're not sure about it, there's also 2 of his short story collections in that top 100. 10th of December is one of them. So you can dip in, and if you like his writing, go for Lincoln in the Bardo. Donna Tartt, who wrote Secret History, her book The Goldfinch is in there, which is one of those books. It's really long, but it's one of those books I was happy it was long, which is very, very rare for me. So that's in there. Anne Patchett is in there with Bel Canto. And the Underground Railroad as well. Kate Atkinson was in there, which I was delighted with.
I mean, there's a huge amount in there on sort of racial politics. That, you know, Britain is not America, so you may find some of the preponderance of that on that list. Maybe not one. You wouldn't perhaps create exactly the same list over here. But when you go through and you see things like, you know, Line of Beauty or Never Let Me Go or Zadie Smith or Wolf Hall, as I say, if you just want to winnow out the British ones, you'll be very happy.
Yeah, the Brits. It's a really good list of, say, the best 10 British novels of the 21st century. They've got that pretty much bang on, I would say. You know, we always have to end with a number 1.
Yes.
Of course, you understand that.
Of course.
So in the top 10, actually, The Corrections is in the top 10, which I love. Jonathan Franzen, but he's number 5. Wolf Hall is number 3. And number 1, it is Elena Ferrante, My Brilliant Friend, which if people haven't read, there's 4 of them, and that's it's a page turner, and it's literary, but you will absolutely love it. And I love it when we have lists, and I love it when we have awards. When people talk about, you know, Oscars and book awards, and they say, "Oh, it's so self-congratulatory," and you think, no, it's a money-making exercise.
Yes,
All
and
awards,
also most people are not congratulating; they're just shouting at the television that you got it wrong, and that's the massive part of lists. Is oh my God, they've completely messed this one up, or you know. Yes, you're correct. That is the best book.
Yeah.
So people just like to either define themselves against it or to say, yes, well, you've been right, or to predict it, to predict what will be there.
But if anyone is saying, oh, we shouldn't compare art to each other, then I tell you a number of industries that would disagree with you. The movie industry, the TV industry, and the book industry, the music industry as well. They're all like, no, please compare, because it absolutely proves a boost to our sales. And every now and again, like with Bernardine Evaristo, it's like a new name comes from nowhere that just would not have come if it hadn't been for those awards. Can I compliment, by the way, the New York Times editors, because as you can imagine, the real fun of the list actually is the comments, which are as awful
As you can imagine,
as you can
nothing
imagine.
drives reader engagement like a list, which
Yeah.
is what I mean. That's what the whole of BuzzFeed, to some extent, was born of people just loving a list,
Yeah, it's
and
all
either
lists.
raging against it or cheering for it.
But I have a series of people who are cleverer than the list here who've responded. I seem to be unable to find the Wind Up Bird Chronicle by Murakami on your list. Did I miss it? Or did you? To which the long-suffering New York Times book editor says, yes, that was published in the 1990s. So great. Someone says, the fact that The Warmth of Other Suns is not on this list is a tragedy. Very disappointed. To which the New York Times editor replies, it is number 2 on the list. Another one, I can't believe Demon Copperhead was left off this list. I never ever read the same book twice, but I've read this one twice, and I'm sure to pick it up for a third time sometime soon. He goes, it is on the list. It's number 61. Well, it should be in the top 10.
Why don't you read the list twice?
There you go. But it's honestly, it's a great list, and I defy anyone not to find something on there that they they want to buy. This is me in defence of lists and in defence of making comparisons between different types of art, because it's incredibly good for the industry.
We'll, on a whole separate occasion, talk about power lists, which are the scum of the earth. But we'll talk about that. Yeah. But in lots of other ways, brilliant.
That's the dream, to be on a power list, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. I once saw, the GQ once did one where David Beckham was more powerful than Rupert Murdoch. There was one, Details magazine in America, Kevin Federline, who was at the time Britney Spears' unemployed backing dancer husband, I think he was more powerful than Bashar al-Assad, the Syrian leader. Yeah.
Listen.
Is Bashar going to do the photo shoot?
Yeah,
and
no, of course
in the end,
he's not going to turn
who will
up.
Do the photo shoot?
Yes, it's who's going to be there. GQ Men of the Year who are available. Here's something I would like to see, like a British power list, either media or politics or whatever it is, that has both Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart in it. Okay. Now the thing to do, of course, is to put them together, because the podcast is such a force. But the thing I would love them to do is separate them and put them separately on that list and rank one of their powers above the others.
God.
Can you imagine the fun of that?
I think we'd feel a great disturbance in the force. Before we go, we'll just talk a little bit about a row that has developed over the BBC's plans to spin off a sort of golden oldies version of Radio 2. And various stations have sprung up, most particularly Boom Radio, to cater to people who feel that they were disenfranchised by Radio 2. Now,
yes, which is aged down a little bit.
They say. But and anyway, these people are very angry with the BBC for trying to spin off another station. And they say that, this will be kind of commercially devastating to us. And they've gone to Ofcom, and Ofcom have said that the BBC need to do a full public interest test, which is you can get everyone from the industry can feed in, the public can feed in. I think this is a tricky one, I have to say, because Boom Radio started and actually describes itself as created by a group of individuals who felt the BBC had stopped caring about the interests of older listeners. Now, I suppose if you just keep saying and keep using the press to push the line that the BBC has disenfranchised listeners, then arguably the BBC, in my view, has a duty to try and refranchise those listeners. I know from talking to people that the BBC feel that in this area, maybe they're not offering people as much value as they would like. And it's not for the BBC to be a sort of, in my view, market failure organisation. This is what's happened to public service broadcasters all around the world, where they thought, oh, well, the market will take care of that. And you sort of eventually retreat into kind of religion and news. And that's sort of what you do. You become irrelevant. The media ecosystem suffers hugely as a result. So it's not for the BBC to be that. I sort of feel like it's the BBC's job to offer as much value as they possibly can in a world where people, including their commercial rivals, are constantly trying to assail the licence fee and say it doesn't offer as much value. But I do have sympathy with people who think they might see their listenership drop off.
I take a slightly different view, which is, Boom Radio. If I'm setting up Boom Radio, of course I'm going to say the BBC is not serving older listeners, because I have to. That's publicity, and I'm starting up a new station. And by the way, that's the gap in the market that I have spotted. Yeah. Older people who feel that Radio 2 has left them behind. Yeah. They want pop music, but they want it older, and they are no longer catered for. So the market then takes up that slack. And if I was Boom Radio, I'd be like, yeah, I saw that gap in the market. I invested quite a lot of money in it. That gap in the market is now going to close almost entirely, because the BBC are going to do a free version of it without adverts, where they can use their talent much more cheaply And suddenly the money I'm invested is not worth anything. And the argument could be, BBC, there is a way of serving those older listeners by rolling them back into Radio 2. You've chosen to take Radio 2 in a certain direction. By doing that, you have left a portion of the population, available to a commercial channel. The commercial channel has said, great, we'll take them. It's hard then to sort of walk back in, mosey back in and say, oh, no, we're gonna take them as well.
But the BBC, I think, can't be constantly under attack for things it's not doing, and then when it tries to do them, be under another form of attack for doing them. I sort of feel, and also what they can do is different to Boom Radio, because they have, if you think of just, I mean, as always, what we don't even talk about enough is just the unbelievable archive of the BBC and what they have. They have all the archive interviews from those years. These are things that are not available to other broadcasters.
I mean, I would say feel free to make them available, because they were paid for by people's licence fee money over many, many years. They weren't paid for by, the BBC Director General out of his pocket. They belong to us. And,
you can get access to them on the BBC, on BBC Sounds.
You absolutely can, but all I'm saying is there is a point at which you can overreach as a channel. When I was growing up, if you liked indie music, you had John Peel.
Yeah.
And that's all you had. You had like 2 hours a night, and then it was 2 hours a week. And now there's an entire channel dedicated to it, which is paid for, by the way. They show those big signs of, in the 70s, this is what the BBC was, and it's BBC One, BBC Two, and the four. But now look at us, and you've got these hundreds of channels, and isn't that incredible? And a bit of me thinks, I'm not sure that is incredible. I think that might be a slight overreach into the market. There has got to come a point where there is overreach. There has got to. You've got to put up a gate at some point and go, the BBC is doing a number of things, and this doesn't necessarily need to be.
Well, they are regulated more than anybody.
Absolutely. If they have money. If they do have money, and I recognise the other thing is it's not super expensive for BBC to put this channel on BBC Sounds, and that must stick in the craw of Boom Radio and people who have actually sort of invested some money and risked some money. If there is money to spare, the place can most usefully be spent is on local radio. That would be what I would say.
Yes.
That is also serving that generation, and it's serving that part of their listenership in a way that is always been so brilliant. And I know the BBC care a great deal about local radio, but it's become underinvested enormously because the money is not there. And I think it's not
and
a great...
local newspapers and local everything has fallen by the wayside. Again, that's a sort of slight sort of, people talk about market failure. They can't just do that. They can't just be market failure.
Exactly that. But I think they do plenty. And I just think comes a point where the optics of it, if you are opening up a series of new radio stations to market to quite a niche audience, which has already been marketed to by commercial rivals, while underfunding local news and local radio, I think that's an issue. The other issue is World Service, of course, which was always funded by the government, and the Tories took that away. One hopes that maybe that comes back into government spending.
I mean, one of the great soft power things ever. I've been in the most like obscure and remote places in the world where people have said, oh, we always listen to the BBC World Service because we don't trust our news or whatever it is. It is one of the most extraordinary things and just the short-sightedness of sort of hobbling it.
So what you'd really want is for the government to take over funding the World Service again, take that funding, take that away from the BBC in terms of having to fund it. Put all of that money that the BBC are getting back straight into local radio is what I would do. I just wonder if it's a great look to be launching all of these BBC Sounds channels, cheap though they are. I do think you have to take a responsibility for the market as well. I do think...
and they will do, and they will be regulated, and there will be court cases if necessary. But I slightly feel that if you're constantly being told, oh, you've let this audience go, you've let this, you've failed them, then trying to make up some of that failure, you can't win.
The trouble, that's not real criticism though. That's commercial. That's people, trying to make a buck and trying to have a bit of publicity. And people are always going to do that. And the BBC will always. But
it's a big part of the media. It's companies, places, people like the Daily Mail or the Times, or who have a commercial interest in seeing the BBC have its wings clipped, or in fact not exist at all, will make a huge amount of hay out of this all the time, and that becomes part of the discourse about the BBC. So you can see why almost all of these things at some small level feel, and certainly have over the last 10 or so years, have felt slightly existential, like, as you say, maybe people won't be in such a crouched position now if they feel that the government is more sympathetic
And
to
also,
their general existence.
why throw meat to those people by saying we're going to have a station for the over 60s playing pop music when it already exists somewhere else? It makes no sense to me.
I think the archive stuff is interesting, and the use of the archive, I think, is really interesting. And
1,000,000%. I just wonder if there's ways of doing that without it stepping on other people's toes, because that's not what the BBC is supposed to do. It's supposed to have a unique offering and to appeal to unique audiences, and that is an enormous grey area. I get that, but if you ask me where my line would be as to the outreach of the BBC, my line would stop just before they hive off this new radio station. So if I was in Ofcom...
My line's the other side.
Yeah. No, I see that. I absolutely see that. But we are both agreed there is a line.
Yes, there is. Of course, there is a line, and the law is agreed there is a line. So we'll see how we'll keep an eye on how that one plays out. All right, then. Is that us done?
Yeah, I think
it
so.
is.
I think it is. But we'll be doing a questions and answer episode on Thursday.
We will be, Richard.
I'm
I'm sure I'll be giving a mistress class in top threes.
But you'll still be in the country then?
Yes.
Okay, that's good.
I will be.
Just after
we
that,
won't like being parted, I must say, but we'll make it work.
Listen, it'll happen. If there are oceans between us, still the rest is entertainment. We'll sail.
Always on.
Always on, all the time. Is that okay, Gary? Did we get that right? He's snarling.